I got props. I'm like Carrot Top. It's Skillet Week, baby. We're going to talk about TCU and SMU and everything else and more. Great tease by me. That's coming up next here on Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Matt Jennings is here. I'm going to have to work out if I'm going to hold this the whole time because this is a heavy prop.
Hey, I love it. I think it's great.
Cast Iron Skillet. We got Iron Skillet Week going on. Matt's here with us. You can follow him at Matt A. Jennings on Twitter. Matt's a freelance writer. He covers TCU football really well. He joins us just about every week during football season. Okay, Matt, let's jump into it. So Sonny kind of alluded to this in his press conference on Tuesday. He was like, yeah, I think the defense is playing better. He also mentioned that the competition the last few weeks has not been necessarily amazing. We know who Nicholls State is. I was actually fairly impressed with what they did against Houston, even though it seems like Holgorsen and company have a little bit of an identity crisis going on right now. The defense, following the Colorado game, they haven't given up a touchdown in 8 quarters. What are you seeing that you like? What do you feel like is just kind of maybe a little bit of smoke and mirrors because of the people they've been playing as of late?
I think the things that I like, we talked about this a little bit last week, but I've seen some more willingness to play with personnel from Joe Gillespie. So we've seen a lot of Shad Banks the last couple weeks, which I think is great. That speed at linebacker helps you out a lot. And he can, you can use him in different sorts of roles and different sort of situations. They've rotated, and Sonny alluded to this as well. They've rotated really deep at corner. I think Josh Newton obviously has one spot really to lock down, but we saw a lot of Channing Canada against Houston. I thought he played pretty darn well. You saw lots of Jonte McMillan as well as Avery Helm. They're getting more of a rotation back there. Abe Kamara at safety. Abe Kamara's gotten in a little bit. Who I think he brings a really physical element at that position, and he has a role to play for sure. And so they're playing with personnel, which I think is good. We had a lot of questions about down to the starting lineup after week 1. So I like that. And I like how aggressive they're being, both in terms of the cushions have not seemed as big. I think the further away we get from the Colorado game, it's going to be more and more obvious that they were playing so conservative to try and avoid getting beat over the top. Because we're not seeing, 12 and 15-yard cushions with any regularity anymore over the last 2 games. We're seeing them more confident of being willing to play bump and run, or at least being willing to trust your preparation, so you don't have to give yourself that much room for error. So I like those things, and like the will and aggressiveness, not just with the pass coverage, but he's called some blitzes more often the last couple weeks. I don't necessarily like sometimes those are kind of delayed blitz looks, which if you got linebackers coming from depth, I don't love that. But they're trying to get pressure on the quarterback, which they did none of against Shedeur Sanders. So that's all good. So that's really it. I like the aggressiveness. I like the playing with personnel. And yeah, to your point, I don't know that Houston's very good. I don't think they're very good on defense. On offense, we'll see. I like Donovan Smith's potential at quarterback, but they did a really good job harassing him. If they can do that more consistently against the quarterbacks coming up on their schedule, then I do think you feel better about things.
One thing I noticed, you talk about the cushions, I think they're still there's similar depth at the start of pre-snap reads, but it seems like those safeties are gradually kind of walking up and creeping up and closing that gap a little bit. They also had some more press coverage in the slot, which I like in, fits and spurts. My general take today, leading into this game, was I think this is a good kind of bird's eye view of what the rest of the season might look like for the defense, because SMU is going to do a lot of the things with their athletes in space that Colorado tried to do, as far as isolating guys, trying to, make those linebackers and safeties run and make plays sideline to sideline. And so I could tell in the second half of that football game that they were coming downhill, they were comfortable, but it also just seemed like they had a pretty good feel for what Houston's going to do. And it's been made pretty clear that if you just want to try to run on this defense and like complete intermediate passes, that's not a good strategy. What are your thoughts about SMU week trying to kind of integrate some of those principles, facing a different offense, and your confidence level in their ability to make some of those plays in space that they couldn't make in the Colorado game?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think SMU's game plan is going to be, on some level, it's going to be related to, it's going to be akin to what Colorado was doing. And they've got in Preston Stone a little bit more of a pocket passer who can make those throws and make you and hit guys in with timing in space and give them a chance to make yards after the catch. So it'll be a test that is more similar to what they saw in week 1. I do think then what you saw the last 2 weeks, I think you want to continue those trends. And I think they'll play well for you just because part of it is you've got tape, right? You've got tape on SMU. You know exactly what their scheme is and what they're going to try and run. And Sonny Dykes worked with Brett Lashley before. He's very familiar with what Rhett's kind of style is. And so I don't think there's any reason that they shouldn't be have a good sense of what to expect in this game. And so then therefore be more willing to be aggressive, which I think was the big hurdle for them against Colorado. I think if they are willing to be physical in pass coverage, I think if they're willing to blitz and get some pressure on Preston Stone, I think they're going to be in pretty good shape. Preston Stone is not, unlike Donovan Smith, he's not really a rushing threat. He's averaging 3 yards per carry, and he's carried the ball 10 times through 3 games, right? So I think, you can feel comfortable like, hey, yeah, let's put some heat on him and see if he can make those throws with guys in his face.
Okay, follow me here because I have a tendency to ramble, and I think I'm going to do it in this little circle around to a question.
Let's go.
TCU has not beaten SMU in Fort Worth since 2017, which is a wild thing to think about. Now, to make that point a little clearer, they've only had 2 games against the Ponies in Fort Worth. 2019, they lost, and 2020 game got canceled because of COVID, and then 2021 they lost at home as well. That being said, this is usually a game where SMU plays with a lot of passion, plays with a lot of fire, and I'll say like they did that for a long time, and maybe they would make it a game for a half, and then usually TCU's talent and depth would take over. The last few years, like even last season, that was a 1-score game. And if not for a special teams miscue, SMU would have gotten the ball back with a chance to go tie it. They were down 8. And so they had to come back in the second half. But last season, there was a lot of national talk about this ball game because Sonny Dykes was going back to Dallas. They hate him because he left. We know the story. And all the vitriol surrounding it. I thought there would be more talk about this year's game, but this is such a loaded weekend of college football that you're not really seeing a lot of, talk about the ball game itself, which leads me to this. I don't really know what the emotions are going to be like Saturday, Matt. Like I know the series is pausing, ending potentially in 3 seasons. They still don't like Sonny in Dallas, but the game's in Fort Worth. So, I mean, part of me thinks this is a good situation, 11 a.m. at home for them to come out with a lot of energy. But I've kind of given up on trying to predict what TCU is going to look like. But I know you think a fast start's important. So
yeah,
discuss that angle of it.
Yeah, well, first in terms of like the emotion, let's talk about that for a second. Both like fan base wise and team wise, I think what you've heard Sonny emphasize over and over again since week 1, the thing that he said coming out of the Colorado game, he's like, hey, that was a team that was excited to play and wanted it more than we did today. And that usually bodes well. And that's usually the team that's going to play better. Right. And he like really drove home the point the last 2 weeks of we need to be the most excited team to play. TCU does, right? And they have been the last 2 weeks. They came out with a lot of passion against Nichols and against Houston, which is hard to do, at least in your FCS game. They came out and they were locked in. They had some miscues on offense, but they were clearly they were focused. And same deal last week against Houston. So I think with this being like the local crosstown rivalry game and it being where, Sonny's old stop and all the off-field stuff that's going on with the series and with SMU going to the ACC and just like this posturing between the two schools this offseason, I think there's going to be of emotion and intensity from both teams. So I think that's going to be good. I don't think TCU has to worry about like the being the flat team that comes out and like SMU getting an early jump on them. And then I think the fan base is going to be riled up because they're tired of losing to SMU at home. Once in Sonny Dykes' first win as SMU's coach over TCU, and then the other time when Gary Patterson accused SMU of assault after the game, which was really fun for everyone involved. So yeah, I think the energy, at least like all things considered, for an 11 a.m. local time kick is going to be high. I think they're going to be focused in, and to your point, I do think a fast start's important because I do think SMU is a vastly more talented team than they have been for most of the 21st century. But the fact is TCU is still the better roster from top to bottom, the deeper team. So if you get yourself out to a nice lead, like you did against Houston, to where you get yourself out to a nice 2-possession lead, you can kind of hold them at arms. What you want to be able to do is kind of hold them at arm's length for the rest of the game, and just kind of lean on them for the full 60 minutes. They did a really good job with that against Houston. You do that again against an SMU team that is going to be scrapping, really itching to just like make a statement in this game. As the new member of the ACC and like the only team in the Metroplex and and one of the top 3 conferences in college football, as Rhett Lashley said a couple weeks ago. So I think TCU is going to need to start fast in order to put away any of that sort of thought.
What a wild time that was when Gary was just like, yeah, Jerry Kill got assaulted by an SMU player with a helmet. And then like they launched an entire investigation. They looked at video evidence and they're like, yeah, we didn't find that. And he's like, well, I still think that happened.
You're not looking at the right video. Come down to our facility and I'll show you the video.
It was like Wednesday. Yeah, I remember it was Wednesday, and I don't remember who they were playing the next week, but it was, middle of the week. It was like time to move on and turn the page to, I think Oklahoma was next at home. And Gary was still like, nope, I'm holding on to this one, fellas. I know what I saw. I feel like that was when I referred to Gary as like your crazy uncle who just kind of rambles, and you put up with it for years because he was winning games, and then things took a turn. And that was the first time he blocked me on Twitter. But I love you, Gary, and I'll stop before I get in any more trouble. Did a great job for the program for a long, long time. 2021 season was one to forget, but that was not your whole tenure by any means. So thanks for the memories. When we come back, we're going to talk with Matt. Matt was right about something, and I want to point it out and give him a chance to discuss that next. This is Locked On Horned Frogs. Before we do that, though, I want to talk about Birddogs. I have not been someone who's been accused of dressing nicely. I would describe my style as casual. And generally, clothes are not the most important thing in the world to me, but I love Birddogs because they feel comfortable. They fit me well. They're sculpted to fit you well. They're sculpted to make you look good. Go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege and you can get a free tumbler with any purchase, which is a fantastic deal. Birddogs, one thing I love about them, they're versatile. You can wear them, just around the house. You can wear them at a social event, at a more formal event, because they look like khaki shorts, but they're not like typical khaki shorts that are restricting and uncomfortable. Birddogs stretch. They fit well. They're breathable. I'm not really sure what breathable means, but I know that's a word that people use when they're talking about clothes, and I would describe Birddogs as breathable. Birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. Go there today. Buy a couple pairs. They've sent me some shorts, and I love them. I'll give personal testimony for Birddogs any day. Birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege. Proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. I don't think Matt said this on the show, but it was before the Colorado game. We were discussing, I think we were just discussing like the offense in general. And Matt texted me and was like, one thing I've come around to lately is the idea that Amani Bailey is just like a perfect fit for this offense because of the space that it creates, the light boxes it creates, and his ability to, have explosiveness, churn out yards. Could be really good. And that has been the case. He was really great against Houston, had a big game against Colorado, of course. I think the thing that's impressed me the most, Matt, is that like he's just always getting positive yards. Like, I had this view of him as a home run threat, which he is, but he really does look like a pretty complete back out there. And the fact that he gets tough yards and is able to grind out and make 2nd and 11, 2nd and 7 instead, which is a big deal. And so what has been your impressions of him as the lead runner in this offense so far this season?
I think the Houston game showed that the offense is kind of coming around to its identity in terms of who they're going to feature at that position, and it's Amani Bailey. He had 20+ carries and 120 yards, like great game for him. And I do think that he is a really good fit for what this offense is because of that straight line speed. As you make, I think kind of the ideal thing for this offense is you make one cut and you go. It's just constant. It's consistently like 9 yards, 10 yards, 12 yards a clip when he's getting that many carries. And it's really hard to, you can drain some clock that way, or you can go tempo with it. You can wear down a defense with it. But to your point, he's not like a scat back with that speed. He's physical. His touchdown run against Houston, like he ran somebody over to get it, right? So that's big for him. If there were one thing that I think is missing from his game, or that at least that we haven't seen yet, is in Gary Patterson's terminology, he doesn't have a lot of wiggle. There's not a lot of shiftiness and kind of eluding tacklers in open space, which I think was an underrated part of Kendre Miller's game last year, because he was a guy who had good vision, could run people over, but could also elude people in space to get that extra yardage or kind of break something open. We haven't really gotten a chance to see that. If there's not a clear line to the end zone for Amani, he's not going to like juke somebody out of their socks to get there, right? So I think that's the one thing that I think could put him over the top. I think he showed a little bit of it against like that touchdown run against Houston. He did kind of hit the dude, but he kind of put a little bit of a stutter on him first. And so maybe we'll see a little bit more of that. But I love what I'm seeing from him so far. And I was very encouraged to see he was featured as much as he was against Houston. I never know what I'm looking at with this offense in terms of like, okay, is this you're reading what the defense is giving you? The defense is offering that to you, and so you're just taking it? Or is it you're making a conscious choice to lean on the run game and take a matchup that you think you like regardless of what the defense is going to show you pre-snap? And so I'll be curious to see if SMU comes out and is showing you like a bunch of loaded boxes and is daring you to throw against one-on-one matchups, right? If suddenly the game plan seems to swing wildly. So that's something that I'll be watching this week for sure.
Right. It's hard to describe. I mean, and maybe it is because it's so RPO heavy. That's actually a really good point. But I mean, like I was going to complain about not running the ball enough against Houston, but then I look at the stat sheet and I'm like, well, they ran the ball 51 times. Yeah. It just feels like there's no real rhythm to the offense. That's the only way I can say it. Like it still seems kind of disjointed. Maybe that's something that comes together with more time. But yeah, sometimes I'm like, man, consecutive run plays here would seem like a nice thing to do, but it just hasn't been really in their nature yet. We'll talk about wide receivers for a second. I'll give a plug. Sonny Dykes Show. They do it at Railhead Barbecue every Monday at 6 p.m., I think. And TCU turns it into a podcast. I think it's Inside TCU Athletics. They turn it into a podcast. And so Sonny Dykes was on the show. Malcolm Kelly was also on the show, which was good to hear from him. Brian Estridge asked him some questions. I encourage you to listen to it if you haven't. But Malcolm talked at one point about the wide receiver rotation, and he mentioned that Savion Williams, because of some things that were going on with his family early in fall camp, he wasn't always available. He had to take care of some business there. And then because of injuries, like he just hasn't really always been in practice. And so this past week was like the first full week of practice that he's really gotten from start to finish, and it showed up on the field. Matt, we were kind of going back and forth today just about there's so many guys that you in your mind you're like, yeah, this dude could be good. This dude could be good. Maybe it's about shortening that rotation a little bit and finding guys that are going to come together and be more cohesive.
I think that's right, and I think the question to me is like, who ultimately is your? It's kind of like in the NBA, like who's your crunch time lineup, right? Like who's your best group of 4 receivers that you can put on the field at the same time, and not just like in terms of like talent, but like who complement each other. And to your point, because of the new guys who are in the room, and because of injuries, and so guys not necessarily being available, I think they're still searching for what that answer is. And Malcolm Kelly did allude to that, like, hey, you know, if Dalen Wright or Jalen Robinson or whoever isn't, or Savion, for different reasons are not available, like it affects the way you're able to execute, and it affects the way you're able to execute within the context of all the other receivers as well. But a year ago, they had you could take it to the bank, like what your group of your 4 dependable receivers were. It was Quentin Johnston, Savion Williams, Darius Davis, Tay Barber. And like those are your guys. You need to go out there, you need to get yardage. Those are your guys, right? And when you run a 2-minute drill, those are your guys. Or you're putting Jared Wiley out there if you want to tight end on the field while you're doing it. I don't know who that group is right now. I think JP Richardson has acquitted himself pretty well thus far. He's the leading receiver on the team through 3 games. He's not a game-breaking burner, but he consistently catches the ball and doesn't have drops, and he gets first downs. You can work with that. Warren Thompson, again, in terms of availability thing, he's the outside receiver that Chandler, it certainly seems like he's been able to get the most reps with, because he's the guy that he seems to trust the most, like when the games actually start. He's got a back shoulder fade to Warren Thompson that he really likes. He hit him for the touchdown on the vertical route against Houston. That's another guy that it looks like you can count on. Okay, awesome. What the slot, I really don't know what you've got there. You know, JoJo Earl's been out there. Jack Besh, they've been out there, and they've also put him in the backfield. They've lined him up tight in the formation. I don't really know. And then you've got, you know, Jordan Bailey, Major Everhart, some young guys who, when they've been on the field, have shown some flashes, but they haven't been on the field very much. And then Savion's not been available. So, like, you just don't know, okay, who are the guys who are going to be out there and who are the guys you can depend on? And they're still searching for that answer. Coming into the season, and we talked about this, I think it would really – I think Savion, it would be really great for them if Savion could be that guy, right?
Yeah.
He's not the same sort of like overwhelming athlete that Quentin Johnston was, but in terms of like, he's a good jump ball receiver. He's a guy who has pretty darn consistent hands. He can go get you first downs. He can attack vertically. He can do intermediate step over the middle. Like, he can do basically everything that you need him to do. He may not gain as much separation. He may not be explosive as after the catch, but he's a really good player. I think he's the guy who, like, okay, if they can make sure he's on the field consistently and he can get all the reps, I think that can unlock some things for you. And I know we've talked about it already, but Cordell Russell, DJ Allen, some other young guys that it's like, I mean, there's talent, there's speed, there's athleticism. Yeah. But what's the right combination of guys to get out there? And can you stick with a combination long enough instead of doing this sort of like a brigade, like, or not?
Yeah,
not
hockey shift type of thing.
Yeah, where it's like, okay, now on this drive, we're going to have a totally different group in there. It's like, well, then how is Chandler Morris supposed to establish real chemistry consistently with this group of guys?
I have some thoughts about the wideouts, and we'll close out with some talk about Chandler Morris. We'll do that next here on Locked On Horned Frogs. Man, you never want to be in an emergency situation. That's not something that people want to think about, but you want to be prepared if you have to be in a life-saving situation, especially with a medical situation. You never know when those are going to pop up. And so Jase Medical is one of our new sponsors, and they give you like first aid kits, or they'll sell you first aid kits, but it's not your typical first aid kit with just some basic things. Jase Medical has 5 life-saving antibiotics, and that you can save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus a additional $20 off by using the code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com, and use that promo code LOCKEDON. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase Case. The Jase Case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you peace of mind, so you're not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jase Medical makes sure you have medication on hand. It's simple. They handle everything from online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication. Again, you can save more than $360 by having these medications on hand and using Jase Medical. And if you use the promo code LOCKEDON at checkout, you can save an additional $20. We thank you. Big thank you to Jase Medical for being a sponsor of the Lockdown Network. Right. The hockey shift thing is interesting. And Kelly said this. He was like, we got some guys that are running with the 3s right now that would run with the 1s and 2s at a lot of different schools, which is awesome. And I understand the need to want to get everybody on the field. But it kind of reminds me of during the dog days of the off season, we'll start looking through the roster, and I'm guilty of this too, but you'll be like, well, man, Corey Wren's a great player. Like Trent Battle's an explosive guy. Like you just go through the list of playmakers, which all that's true. I'm not singling out those guys other than to say, like, at a certain point, you have to get a rotation down. Like you just have to have players. You can only have so many players on the field at one time. You have to figure out who you can go to in certain situations. And I think that'll shrink as the year goes on. And maybe there'll be more room for guys like Cordell and DJ to get involved as they kind of get more acclimated to things. But, I feel like things will work better if you have a pretty clear hierarchy of, your playmakers and how you want to distribute the ball to them. Speaking of distributing the ball, I was super impressed with Chandler Saturday. I thought just from like an intangible standpoint, his ability to feel the rush, take hits, make throws, use his legs, but also like he was throwing some bullets. Like, he was slinging the ball around a little bit. I know you're working on a theory about Chandler's approach to a football game, and you don't have to share that if you're not ready to. But just your thoughts about his kind of progression the past few weeks.
I think I and probably many other people, and again, like I'm gonna couch this with, we're pretty sure that Houston's bad, and we're pretty sure that Houston's defense is bad, and also if you're playing a bad team, you should be able to execute your offense well, and you should be able to win comfortably. And they did that on Saturday. They did what they're supposed to do. Shouldn't get penalized for just doing what you're supposed to do. We can nitpick about red zone and short yardage, and I have a feeling that we will, and we'll do that all season. But I agree. I think Chandler, on the whole, was very accurate. Basically, all the miscues were a result of drops that were accurate throws that his receivers had a chance at. And again, that comes with the reps and the chemistry and the timing and the rapport that they're trying to build between him and this group of receivers. But he was on target basically all night. He made good decisions basically all night. The interception was not his fault. I think the play call was junk. But he put the ball on Jared Wiley's hands, and it bounced off his hands, and it ends up in the defensive back's hands. And then he goes and chases the guy down for a tackle to, keep it from being an even more catastrophic play, right? So there's a toughness with him. The element that he brings with his legs, whether it's on designed runs or just on scrambles, they didn't have an answer for that all night. He's TCU's second leading rusher, which I don't think is a thing that you want to keep happening over the course of the season, but it's nice that he brings that. Awesome. If I were to have one critique, and I said this on Twitter on Saturday, I hated the sack force fumble because he was like trying to switch hands as he's getting wrapped up. I'm like, that's like day one poor ball handling, like a mistake that you try and coach out. Like, once you start getting bodies on you, you put 2 hands on the ball. Like, I don't know what that was. So I need to voice that. But on the whole, making good decisions, being accurate with the ball. To your point about the take, Chandler and Max Duggan are very different quarterbacks, and not just in terms of like size and skill set, but in terms of vibes. Max reminded me of like, like if we're talking in terms of like movie or TV tropes, he reminds me of like the old grizzled, veteran being reluctantly pulled into action kind of thing, like Joel in The Last of Us, to use a rather contemporary one. But just like, like when he like had to, he didn't want to go on an adventure. He didn't want to improvise. He didn't want to freelance. He's like, and when he was forced to, it felt very much like, oh crap, oh I guess we're doing this. I guess I have to go make something happen. He wasn't like seeking it out, but when he did, he was like, okay, I guess I have to do this. And he would go and he'd run somebody over for a first down, or he'd scramble and buy time or whatever. But it wasn't like what he wanted. He wanted to play within structure. And I think Chandler's playing within the structure of the offense, but he also has a little bit more of a true like gunslinger vibe. More of a, if I were to think of a comparison of recent quarterbacks, you think about guys like, I don't know, like Sam Howell or like Baker Mayfield, not the same talent level, obviously, but like that mindset of like, screw it, we ball, and like I'm gonna make something happen, and that ball handling thing on the sack is one of those things. He's like, no, I still believe I can do it. I can make something happen. Which I love that belief and love that confidence. And it's allowing him to be dynamic with his legs. He's believing in it in terms of his in terms of trying to take shots downfield, which is something that we were worried about, I think, early on. And they are compensating for his limitations in arm strength, like the throws to Savion and to Warren Thompson for touchdowns. He had another one to Jalen Robinson that was a drop. Those weren't like moonshot, like 40 yards in the air thing, but it was timing things. He's like, I know my guy has a one-on-one matchup. I know he's won his one-on-one matchup. I'm going to get the ball out quick and let him run under it and make a play on the ball. And you can still have a vertical passing game that way. But he's not afraid of those shots. He's consistently attacking them. He doesn't hesitate. And so I think those things, like vibe-wise, are the thing that kind of set Chandler Morris apart. And if he can just build chemistry with these receivers, if they can just find a go-to guy, that he can rely on, that can do that downfield, I think you feel a lot better about the offense as a whole.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Get it done, Frogs. Haven't won this they won it last year. Haven't won this Haven't won this in Fort Worth since 2017. That's bull junk, as Deion Sanders would say. In the bull junk. Get it done. Thank you, Matt, for being here. Thank you to everyone listening and watching. It's Locked on Horned Frogs. It's your team, and we do it every day.